Hey guys, I'm super excited to introduce you to Steph Silver. Steph is the owner of Vine Collective, a branding, marketing, leadership, and sales agency, works with clients of all sizes, and she does a phenomenal job. She's also the host of MVP Business Podcast. She has some amazing interviews with people that are out there making a difference in the type of work that they're doing. Really a phenomenal podcast that you've got to check out. I'm super excited to be a guest on her podcast, which will be an episode coming up later this summer. But I'm excited to have her here for the Ripple Effect podcast because she is such an inspiration. She is just one of those dynamite individuals that once you meet her, you just want to be friends with her forever because she has that kind of vibe. And I love her for it. I've known her for a long time. She's been a huge supporter, an excellent Rippler. And I'm so excited for her to be a part of the Ripple Effect podcast. So let's dive right in. Hey, you.
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Awesome.
So you're not at the studio today?
Not today.
No interviews?
No interviews, and I have kids.
Oh, yeah. First day of summer, right? Or did they get out earlier this week?
It's the second day of summer for us.
How's that going so far?
I think it's good. I'm also moving this weekend. So
Oh my gosh. You have a lot going on. We could have done this any other time.
No, that's okay. I am definitely a glutton for punishment and overcommitment.
Well, I will try and get this off your plate as quickly and as efficiently as I possibly can. How about that?
Sounds good. The kids know that they're old enough that they understand requests and most of the time abide by them.
Yeah. That's okay. If they come in, they can just be part of the show. It's fine. I did one for my my construction company, and we had a woman that we were featuring for our Women in Construction series, and her she has 5 kids, and they both were, her and her husband, good friends of mine. They were originally from Austin, used to come to our Ripple events, but now live in Ohio. But the kids were just in and out the whole time, and it was the best because people were like, "Oh, I love." They had one kid that was actually sick that day, but it was a lot of fun. So we just roll with the punches. It's not a problem.
Yeah, it's real life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to kick us off, and really it's just a conversation amongst friends. So I don't even feel like I'm as professionally prepared as you were. I mean, you're so amazing, but I did an intro before you joined. So I'm good to go there, and we'll just dive in.
Awesome.
All right. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Ripple Effect podcast. I am your host, Steve Harper, and with me today is Steph Silver. Steph and I have been great friends for a long time. She's an awesome Rippler, and as I indicated in the introduction, she is a incredible entrepreneur, and I'm super excited to have her part of this show. So Steph, welcome to the Ripple Effect podcast.
Thanks. I'm so excited to be here.
I am too. I'm excited that you're here. I got to tell you, I'm a little bit nervous because I just did your show and it was like, oh my God, this was a first-rate experience. I went to a studio. You were like, you came in, you had a mission. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to like up my game or something. So
no, not at all. I mean, you know me, I just like to talk. So
yeah.
It works out.
I love it. I love it. Well, before we get into like what you do from a business perspective, one of the things I always like to do with this show is give people a perspective of who I'm interviewing, right? Our guests and the whole concept of the Ripple and sort of how that plays in. And we'll cover that here in a little bit, but I'm a really big believer in the origin story mainly because I'm a comic book nerd, right? So I kind of like to know how people became who they became. So can you give our audience a sense of kind of who Steph Silver is and sort of, what you're the most proud of and what you've become?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh gosh, I don't know what I'm most proud of other than my children. But
that's a good thing to be proud of.
There's so much, as we get older, our origin story gets longer. So there's a challenge there. But, I guess to put it all into a, starting in a like neat little package, I was born in Oklahoma, but quickly moved all over the United States. I never lived in one home longer than 1 year.
Wow.
I actually went to 5 different schools my 8th grade year. And between me and my brother and sister, I was the only one that was like, okay, cool, let's go. I don't know. My mom or my dad loved to move, and my mom would just be like, all right. And we would leave everything behind and just
Wow.
go.
Really?
So there were times that we would, well, I mean, there was a lot of times we would live in a campground for a couple of weeks, or a shelter,
Oh,
or
wow.
out of our car or whatever, until my dad was a carpet layer. My mom was a waitress who would just figure it out in some new town. I started working when I was 8 years old, and partially because I had to, but partially because I just loved it.
Yeah.
One of my mom's friends asked me to work. We lived in a tourist town in Nevada, and she asked me to work the camel races, which, every year you got it. It's the camel races.
Yeah.
So it's one of the really, really big, busy days in
Yeah.
Virginia City, Nevada, and I bus tables. And then her boss was like, wow, she actually did a really good job. Do you want to work for us for $2 an hour?
That's big
Cha-ching.
money at that time, right? Yeah.
Totally. I
Yeah.
mean, from 0 to 2, that was great. And I ended up working there for 4 years, and at one point, was working there and at the local grocery store, and also babysitting, and that kinda sums up
Wow.
who I am now, because it's all kind of been the same-ish since, except that I moved consistently at least every year until I was about 23. When I graduated from college, I bought a house.
Yeah.
And we lived there for 10 years, and then we moved and we lived there for 7 years.
Wow.
Yep.
And then
So
yet as we got on today, you said, you're moving today.
that's correct.
Talk about irony, right? That's awesome.
Yeah. So
Well, and so, you kinda had what seemed like a little bit of a nomadic, childhood, which probably gave you, I can see why when I first met you, and I've seen you since, obviously, how you work in a room of strangers. You haven't met a stranger, right? Not only do you have the personality that just lights up the room, but you really, walk in, and you almost make everybody feel like they've known you all this time, even though they may be meeting you for the first time. You certainly made me feel that way. And now I can kind of understand a little bit of that origin story in terms of
mhm.
you kind of had to adapt and be that way, right? With all these new environments.
Mhm. Yeah, I don't know if it's nature or nurture, but I definitely had to figure out how to quickly fit in,
Yeah.
and I guess I intuitively figured out that you don't fit in by talking about yourself and trying to uh, you know, take over the room. You
Yeah.
you fit in by seeing, learning what's going on with everyone else, and then being a chameleon.
Yeah.
So I think it's like I said, my brother and sister didn't. They're more introverted
Uh-huh.
and don't like big crowds and change. So I think a little bit I was more wired for it, and
Yeah.
wired to continue to do this thing of sales and marketing, and business life generally.
Yeah.
But also, I absolutely was trained.
Well, I mean, it serves you well, obviously, and your approach even now, I think, is really one of, genuine interest in the people that you meet, and sort of understanding the story, not only through your awesome podcast, the MVP Business Podcast. I've been going back through and listening to your prior episodes and just loving it. You not only have an amazing gift in terms of getting people's stories out of them and understanding what strategies and approaches that they've taken in order to, grow and be successful in their businesses, but you really leave some, some of the impression for the audience that, you're really playing that role of detective, and you're trying to uncover those key points that really can be knowledge nuggets that really come from
Mhm.
these people. And that's a real gift, and clearly that's what you've kind of perfected all these years, right? Just as part of what you do, not only for your regular job, but, at the end of the day, just kind of who you are as a person.
Exactly. I had been thinking about doing a podcast just because I was in marketing and that's what people were doing. But then I was at a networking event, and I found, that I was doing my thing of, talk to a bunch of people and then sit down and talk to one person for an hour and not want to leave because I wanted to continue to dig into their
Yeah.
story and then
Yep.
become best friends with them forever. And I thought, people need to hear these stories. There's so much more. And I think that is what I was thinking. So for MVP business, what I think is different is it's not all about business. I go as deep as the guest will let me,
Yep.
and try to pull together the understanding and reality that there really is no separation between business and life. They are, I mean, you're living, right? Like
That's
you
right.
can't
Yep. It's all
completely
part of it.
separate those
That's
things.
right. Yeah.
And sometimes tragedies are happening at home, and you wonder why your business is suffering.
Yeah.
Well, hello, you carry your emotions with you.
Yeah.
When things are going well, they tend to go well in all those different directions. So we have to care for ourselves fully in
Yeah.
our work lives and our uh, home lives and our spiritual lives in order for all of those things to succeed. And if you leave one out, then it's going to suffer.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's a great perspective. Let me ask you, I'm going to ask you a couple of different ripple questions, but, from your childhood, sort of what did all of that moving around and sort of involved, sort of require you to get into new environments? What lessons did you pick up that you apply today?
There are a couple of lessons that I keep trying to remind myself because, we think that, especially, so I'm turned 42 this year, and a woman that works for me turned 30, and she's like, so it gets easier from here, right? Like we figured it out. We went through all the hard stuff. I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
girl. um, we think we've learned the lessons, but there's always more to learn is the big, deep answer. But we have to continually remind ourselves, there's a reason that Shakespeare's stories are told over and over and over with different names and modern characters, and not just literally his stories, but the context and lessons. So one of the things that is kind of bubbling up for me now is I fully realized that year that I moved 5 times in one school year and multiple times during the summer during that year
Yeah.
as well. I was in 8th grade, so I was 14,
Yeah.
and I was, already trying to discover myself, and I realized that it was a great opportunity for me to move because I could completely change my personality and the way I dressed and my hair, and nobody would be like, poser, who are you trying to be? Well, I mean, I tried to be a skater for a little bit. And that didn't really work out for me. I'm not coordinated and I'm not cool. So was not a combination. But then I got to go, that didn't work, and leave instead of
I get a do-over in the next town, right?
exactly. Or if I had all those, if there's somebody listening that was one of these boyfriends that I was like, this isn't really working out, and I would just disappear. And I'm like, whoa, I didn't have to break up with them. That was easy. So lesson is, have the hard conversations, because somebody's going to have to wonder, like, where did that, I was just talking to a friend of mine that I went to high school with, and we're trying to wrap our heads around the fact that we haven't seen or talked to each other in 27 years. So we keep
Wow.
saying it was just 7.
Yeah.
But also the concept of how much we can change but stay the same, even as hard
Mhm.
as we try to and strive to be somebody different. Like I've tried for a long time to be the Pinterest perfect, and that's by far not who I am. And somehow yourself just continues to bubble up, and with those people that you love, it doesn't matter how many years goes by.
Right.
It's just like this happened with us, right?
Yeah,
We
exactly.
sat down and was like, hey, how's it going, blah, then we're like 100% back in it.
Yeah.
And when you allow yourself to connect,
Yeah.
then you find that that happens more and more.
Absolutely. No, that's well said, and excellent. I mean, an excellent life lesson. I think, at the end of the day, you really you've kind of you live the kind of authenticity that you really portray to everybody, and that's what is so attractive about you. And I think that's why people like, being around you. You've got this energy and this sort of focus that just it's really intoxicating, and people love that, which is great. Not everybody has that, right? And
Thank
yeah,
you.
and like you've kind of proven, that can be a learned skill, right? It can be something you can get better at. It can be something that you can work on, and you can leverage to your advantage. And you started off by saying, nobody really wants to hear, somebody talk about themselves, but you have this unbelievable gift. I think you and I both kind of possess this, where we kind of put everybody else on stage, right?
Mhm.
Let's ask some good questions, and because they're not because we're necessarily shy about sharing our stuff. We would if we were, the opportunity was presented to us. But at the end of the day, it's, you know, the best way to learn to connect with somebody is by getting them to open up and build that level of trust. And the ripple process is all about that, right? Leveraging a question so you can learn something about somebody, right? And hopefully walk away and find a connection point, which is that thing that you have in common, right? Something that makes them unique to you. It's not a job title, it's not a job responsibility. It's none of these trappings of, sort of what these a lot of the younger generation now calls the, the influencer,
Mm.
aspects, right? It's about who that person is in their core, right? In their heart. And having those heart to heart, belly to belly conversations are so critical and key, right? So you're fantastic at doing it. I have to ask you to share the story you shared with me when I was on your podcast. Actually, we talked about it after the podcast was over, but your unique trip to New York, and how connection really led you to a really pretty delightful experience.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites and something that I'll never forget. I had just gone to a Tony Robbins conference, and well, I was in the middle of it, and I was commuting every day for 4 days, I think, from Manhattan. I was staying at an aunt's apartment in Manhattan, and the conference was in New Jersey. So if you have ever made that track, it's not really an easy one. There's
Right.
multiple changes and of trains, and I got on the train, and everybody says, like, don't talk to anybody in New York City. Like, everybody's mean and evil, and
Yeah.
they'll try to steal from you and do terrible things. So I get on the train, and I've been to like 1 or 2 days of Tony so far. I think this was my second day. So if you've been to a Tony Robbins conference,
Yeah.
it's like full on, full energy, high fives and hugs, and like I get to know, especially because this is
Yeah.
already my personality. You fall in love with everybody, like
Yep.
all 15,000 people in the stadium. So then when you leave that space, it's like you're still like, everybody's my best friend and we all want to do amazing things in the world. So I was in that mind space, which is already my mind space. It was just expanded. And I was actually going so I was fresh, but I had not slept more than 3 hours because Tony is a like get there late, stay late kind of person. So I get on the train, and I see this gentleman who looks really well put together and handsome. And I had told myself a couple months ago that I was going to make sure that I don't hold back any compliments. And I
Love
realized that I had to extend that to men as well, even though it can be uncomfortable,
it.
because you never know what they might think
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
want from there. And so here I am on a train in New York City, going to New Jersey, and
After being told not to talk to strangers in New York.
yes, definitely.
This is
Uh,
so you. I love this.
I look over and I see this guy, and I was like, "Hey, I just want to tell you, you look really handsome. Like, you're really well put together." And he's like, "Oh, thank you." And he said, "You look nice too." And I was like, "Well, I mean, I'm married, and I'm not trying to hit on you or anything. I just thought that you would want to know that that's what I'm thinking. Like, you look really nice."
Well
And
done. Yeah.
like, sorry. And he's like, "Well, I mean, if you want to grab drinks." I'm like, "No, no, no, that's not that's not what I'm trying to do here. I just, just wanted to tell you you look nice." And then we started this conversation, and from New Jersey to, it wasn't Grand Central, but it was, maybe it was, I don't know. I didn't really know where I was going. I honestly took a different route every time I went to New Jersey and every time I went back, like even walking blocks
Yeah.
and blocks and blocks every time because the time I got on the train was different and I couldn't figure it out. Anyway, I was always there on time. So I'm on the train with this guy and we start talking, and um, it turns out that he starts talking about how his grandmother had just passed away. He didn't know her very well, but nobody in the family was around to take care of her, and so he ended up being her hospice nurse.
Oh,
And I started talking about how my mother had just passed away a couple months prior, and
wow.
we kind of just went from like, "Hey, you look nice," to super deep, really
Yeah.
fast. And
That's that
then
connection point I was talking about earlier, right? You found it and you
absolutely.
just go right for it.
And we go to the trains, the one of the changes, and he's been there, done that a million times, and so he's like helping me, figure out what to do and where to go. And he buys a train ticket too because he doesn't want to stop the conversation. And we're having such a deep conversation that we both at the same time realize that here we are in, like I said, I don't know if it was Grand Central or if it was another change that was very, very similar, where it's, hundreds of thousands of people rushing around in different places. But we were so engrossed in the conversation that it was like those movies that you see where you can only see the person that you're talking to
Yeah.
and everything else is a blur around you. And so we get on the next train, and we continue to talk and talk about spiritual stuff and life and change, and like we're both kind of crying a little bit.
Wow.
And then it's time for me to go, and he's like, I don't want to stop this conversation. I'm like, yeah, but I got to see Tony. um, and so I got his card, and when the conference was over and I got home, I sent him a plant because his grandmother had left him her apartment, and he moved in, and it was kind of this is the empty space. So he
Yeah.
had this like meditation room, and I'm like, well, you need a plant to
Yeah.
help you connect. And we've been writing and talking ever since, and it's been 4 years.
Wow. That
And we
is
don't talk
awesome.
all the time, but it's like, hey, it's Mother's Day, hey, Christmas, happy, what's going
Yeah.
on with your life. And it was absolutely amazing. And it's not the only time that something similar has happened, but it is, for me, just one of the most beautiful things, because it was, the place that everybody says don't talk to strangers,
Yeah.
and I don't know how to do that, first of all. Um, but because I allowed it, it went from zero to deep
Yeah.
in no time at all. And I feel like we have this lifelong connection. And I don't know, I honestly feel like we were meant to talk to each
Yeah.
other because there was such a need to talk about that depth of life that a lot of people don't allow to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I'm a big believer that people show up in your life at exactly the time that they're supposed to. And especially in today's device distracted, world that we're in, we often aren't looking up and looking out to, take advantage of those opportunities. And yes, that seems, like it's a pretty risky move to tell a guy on a subway in New York, hey, you're looking good today. You're a nice looking man. At the end of the day, I think that there's this unique human need for all of us to be recognized by another human being, right? And
Yes.
it's that heart to heart, belly to belly thing that I think we all strive for because we so lack it now. I mean, we're in a society where it's easier than it ever has been in the history of mankind to connect with anybody. And yet we are so poor at doing it. And it can start with just a simple conversation around or just a simple compliment which kicks off the conversation and you just never know where it'll go. And that's what I always try and encourage my audience to recognize is that you never know where that conversation may take you. And that ripple that you created just by shining a light on somebody for just that second, what kind of difference it might make in their day, might make in their self-confidence in their life. And that's just it's a tremendous gift that you're giving them, but you're also getting that gift back to yourself. I mean, look at how when you tell the story and sort of, I can see the emotion wrapped up in your face about how important that was to you. And
Mm.
I can see you probably have, oodles of stories like that because you have that kind of impact on people. But that one really spoke to me because as I was driving home after our podcast that day, I was really thinking about that and thinking about just how, I don't know that you recognize that you have this superpower that, to connect with people. But when you do, it is so critical and so important. That's one of your big contributions in life, I think.
Yeah, it's funny. I was listening to some of your previous podcasts, and I heard you ask, "What is your superpower?" And I was like, "Oh, he's going to ask me that." And I thought about it, and I thought, I think it's connection and my ability to truly see people.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you. I guess it's not funny. Nobody's laughing. That you said the
I'm
same
laughing.
thing.
I think it's great. We're
Um,
laughing.
I just realized that though, because at my previous agency, I worked my way. I say my previous agency, the agency that I previously worked for, I worked my way up from sales to vice president of the company over a number of years, and had had many roles in between. And even as vice president, it was a small agency, so they had to hire 3 people to replace me.
Yeah.
But so I had multiple different things that I did. But as I was leaving, I thought, what the heck am I doing? I don't actually have a skill. What am I going to do? So I actually, the reason I have my own business is because I thought, I don't know how to put on a resume what I do. And I struggled with that for a really long time. I'm like, I'm not a designer. I'm not a web developer. I'm not a copywriter. Like, I don't have a skill. And it wasn't until one of the designers said, like, oh my gosh, Stephanie, there's no way I could do this without you. I'm like,
Yeah. Oh,
oh, yeah, you do need me to talk to people.
yeah. Yeah.
To, be that connector. And it wasn't even then that I realized how much of a skill it was, until it's just been recently that I realized it's not just a business skill. It is my life skill. It is my superpower.
Yeah.
And this is kind of strange, and I don't even know where to go with it, but I feel like, and it sometimes confuses people
Yeah.
when, especially I meet somebody at a networking event, we get really close really fast, and then all of a sudden they think we're in a relationship, or, like, I'm like, whoa, ah, that's not what's happening. And we have to talk, around and define. But I think it's people just aren't used to this level of openness and connectedness, period, especially how quickly it can
Yeah.
come.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's an interesting perspective. I've run into that same situation as well, where I think people had different sets of expectations in terms of the connection. And I'm honored and appreciative of that. Obviously, it's it creates other challenges, but when you can have those conversations and you can say, hey, look, what do you want to get out of this, right? I think
Mm.
that we as society, we have this sort of I would say a challenge to creating a layer of transparency in terms of those interactions. I think that a lot of people aren't very good at communicating. First of all, when we find a new friend, it's like the greatest thing in the world,
Mhm.
but nobody really knows how to set the proper expectations or define the rules of engagement. And I think if you can do that and you can say, look, I've really enjoyed this. I love the fact that we're professional friends and we're engaging at this level, and I'll be there for you all the time. Or we can connect, whether you're running into a rough patch or you need some strategy or some ideas, sort of helping those folks understand, okay, this is how we navigate those crazy waters. Because otherwise, left to our own devices, people think, all sorts of things, obviously that could be right or could be wrong, and could create, some uncomfortableness relative to how that relationship continues, or if it does. And so
Mhm.
I think that ultimately, I always tell my coaching clients is like, hey, you need to help these people understand what you need out of the relationship, but you also have to understand to a certain degree what they want. And you only get there by asking questions, having a dialogue and a conversation about it, so that everybody can figure out, hey, are we heading in the same direction? And if not, how do we get back going in the same direction? or maybe we're going in completely opposite directions. That's okay too. We want to wish each other well, but we may not necessarily be on the same path. And I think that we just don't give enough thought or process into that in terms of how
Mhm.
we really want to cultivate those relationships for our personal life as well as our professional.
I think in addition to that, it's the allowing yourself to open up and be deep, but have the conversation when it gets uh, awkward, like not just like, run
Yeah.
away. um, um, I think a lot of people are afraid or uncomfortable with
Yes.
allowing themselves to have a connection. And so when it happens, they feel like it must be something, I don't know, sometimes
Yeah.
it's more and sometimes, or, it's hard to define.
Yeah.
But obviously everybody has some sort of lines. But a lot of people run away from the ability to connect
Yep.
because they are afraid to allow themselves to go beyond something that they're comfortable with. And
Yeah.
obviously you shouldn't go beyond what you're comfortable with, but um, saying that you're not going to have a conversation with someone of the opposite sex, for instance, or
Yeah.
like tell somebody that they're handsome.
Yeah.
That fear can hold you back from having really beautiful, amazing experiences. So as long as you are willing to be upfront and have those conversations and say, this is what I'm looking for is a human to human,
Yeah.
belly to belly, like you
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
conversation and connection. And I tell people this, that I fall in love all the time. And it doesn't mean that I want you to be my like one and only life partner.
Right.
It just means that I see you, and
Yeah.
I think that you're amazing. And maybe
Yeah.
I do want you to be in my life forever. I don't have
Yeah.
time for all the people that I want to be in my life forever. But allowing those, like, and then sometimes like I feel it like this, universal energy that just lights me up.
Yep.
And then when they feel that too, they think, oh my gosh, we're in love. Or I don't know what it is. But this is another story that I love. And I want these people to like hear these podcasts and tell me that they heard the story, because I think that that's kind of sometimes how life works. But so when I was 24, it was like directly out of college. One of my first jobs was director of sales and marketing for Shoreline Grill, a high-end restaurant in
Yeah.
Austin. And one of the things that we did was hire a PR company to help us do some research around town to see like what we can do to step things up. And the first thing that we did was go to multiple different restaurants and just experience their dining experience. And so we had 3 different people from the PR company, the owner and myself, who all went to like Eddie V's and True Lux and all these really nice restaurants. And we had to fully experience it. So we, ordered a glass of wine, appetizer, entree, dessert, and, went through the whole thing. So we did this with all 5 of us twice. And then then it's like slowly dwindled to just me and this other guy that was about my age.
Hmm.
And the last and you're having dinner, so you're talking, you're connecting,
Yeah.
you're going through stories. So one of the last times we were having dinner, it was at Trulux. And he asked, what are you doing this weekend? I'm like, oh, I'm going dancing with my friends and I'm really excited. And he's like, is it okay that I don't like to dance? uh yeah, that's totally cool.
Yeah.
That's fine. Not everybody likes to dance. And then I was like, oh shit, he thinks this is a date. I'm like, but wait, Shoreline Grill is paying your company to pay you to be here. How do you think this is a date?
Yeah.
And that was the first time that had ever happened to me, and maybe it happened before and I never realized it, but I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
So I wrote him a long email. It's like, I think that you have a different understanding of what's happening. And he called me. He was so upset. He's like, I can't work. I got to come over and talk to you. So we like sat in his car in the parking lot, and he's like, I definitely had very different thoughts of what was happening. I'm like, I don't understand. I mean, my company was paying you.
Yeah.
But it was the depth of conversation, and it was like we weren't just superficial like how's work. And so that was the first time I fully understood the level of confusion that can
Yeah.
be there when, especially if it's a male female conversation.
Sure.
But even when it's not, there can be a connection that like feels like a different kind of love.
Yeah.
um and it's hard when you don't it's hard to set expectation, like when you're in a sales conversation, it's like, this is what I want to get out of this call. What
Yeah.
is your goal?
Yeah. Yeah.
But when
Exactly.
you have a real life conversation, and like that gentleman in New York, Caesar, and I, we're talking about life and death and, really big things, it's easy to kind of go down a path and realize that nobody's ever heard you that way before.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever
Yeah.
connected with you that way before.
Yep.
But I encourage everyone to kind of maybe don't let down the walls if you're not comfortable with that, but like take a brick down every once in a while,
Yeah.
open the curtains. It's such a beautiful thing
Yes.
to
Absolutely.
connect.
Yeah.
And it's just my favorite thing in the whole wide world.
Well, I think that the world has kind of boiled down to the approach for most people is they're afraid to be vulnerable, so they don't, and they won't put themselves in that position. And you miss a lot of great opportunities, like you indicated, just by not putting yourself out there. And then the other flip side of that is, okay, well, I'll connect, but then we only connect at the surface level, right? And we know each other's profession, we know each other's, particulars for the basics, right? But nothing meaningful. Like you said, the big topics, the big conversations are where the real magic happens. And it does get tricky. And I think why we as humans are hardwired to go almost all the way intimate, to that level of intimacy in those conversations, and then start to, hear the stories in our own head or make up these scenarios, is because a lot of times we're so in, I think this is true for a lot of people, we're so lacking anything of that authentic connection, that deep connection,
Yeah.
that you naturally are drawn to that regardless, right? And I always tell my clients, and I had one female coaching client that I was working with, and she was like, she was in a situation where every interaction she was having professionally, she felt like it would turn a weird dynamic, because she's like, am I that good a connector that they all fall in love with me? And I'm like, yeah. Here's the thing though, there's different levels of love, right? There's romantic love, and that can be tricky. And then there's the professional love. And she's like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, really what you're trying to do, and this, sales and marketing and everything that you're great at, is it's really capturing both the mind and the heart, right? The heart and the
Mhm.
mind. That piece is really essential. And you want those people to have that feeling that every time they see you, every time they talk to you, every time they interact with you, much less do any business with you, that they have that level of commitment to the relationship. And you only get there by being vulnerable, being willing to go a little bit outside the lines in order to create that kind of relationship. But provided that you set the right expectation, and
Mhm.
you are upfront about where you want this to go, and you're vocal about it, right? People's always assume, well, that's common sense. Well, yeah, maybe it is for you, but maybe it isn't for them, right? So
No.
once you do that, then you set these situations up in a really, a much more successful dynamic. And I think that, for her, she started having those conversations, and she was like, and I was assuming, and she came back to me one time. She's like, well, you mentioned that it's my ego at play. Maybe I'm, overthinking some of it. And she's like, and you were right. Damn it. My ego thought two of these guys really were like in love with me. And they're like, no, dude. I'm like, I just think you're awesome for work. I mean,
Yeah.
so she's like, I felt like a little bit weird, but she's like, I felt like it needed to be said. And she's like, and those relationships are, now reset, and they're off to a good, headed down a good path.
Yeah, and having all difficult conversations is necessary. And sometimes you realize that you are off base, but it's better to have it.
Yeah.
There's a couple of different things that have been popping up in my head. One is another story about a client of mine who it was a husband and wife client, and they had started their business at the beginning of 2020, and it wasn't, and we did beautiful branding, amazing product, and they handcrafted skincare in their home, and then expanded it out and had a lab, and but it wasn't selling as quickly as they wanted it to. So the numbers weren't lining up for them to continue to have Vine Collective on as their agency. And I knew the conversation was coming because I know their numbers, and I know
Yeah.
what we charge. And so we got on the phone, and I could see that they were a little uncomfortable. And I started into the conversation. I'm like, I understand, where we are. I want you guys to know that I love you so much, and I love your product, and I think you're amazing. And I just want you to be successful. So wherever this conversation goes, I completely understand. And John, the husband, said, Stephanie, I'm so glad you said that, because Vivian and I were talking, and she said, I don't know that I can fire Stephanie. I love her. And John said, well, why don't you just tell her that? And she said, I don't know, like, that doesn't, it's not really a professional word.
Yeah.
And he said, so I'm glad you said it first, because we feel like we love you as a family member. And it's, like, hard to fire your niece or whatever.
Yeah.
And I said, well, I completely understand that, and I feel the same way. So we can continue to love each other and be friends. And I'll still help you in any way that I can. If you have a question, I can't have you on like a regular weekly call schedule anymore,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I definitely want to help you, and I still do. And we have lunch together, and they were guests on my podcast. And um, it is, like you said, it's understanding that there are so many different levels of love, and they're all mostly okay as long as everybody agrees.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
the
and like your situation, right? At the end of the day, because you made it easy for them, and I hate the word fired, because that's not really
Yeah,
what happens. At the end of the
uh-uh,
day, it's like, hey, look, we just can't continue to pay you. It doesn't mean I
right.
don't want to. If we had the money, we would, right? But at the end of the day, because you make that such a great situation for them, right? Shows the kind of entrepreneur and business owner that you are, which just makes me smile. But at the end of the day, when things make that turn and they're ready to take that next leap, and they've got the sales and the revenue to support it, you're going to be the first call, right? So
Mhm.
that's phenomenal.
The other thing that I was thinking, thank you. I agree, and that's how I coach businesses to work as well, and what I believe that true successful businesses have at their core and at their heart, because every business has a heart too. But the other thing that I was thinking is, in all these conversations about connection, the after I went and had that experience, I mean, I talked to everybody in New York, and it was all fantastic, and nobody tried to mug me. But I was thinking that I wonder if the closer and the more people that are on top of each other, the more disconnected you
Yeah.
become, because
Yeah.
of fear, or like you just want your space. It's like if you have 10 kids, you just don't, you're not trying to connect with anybody. You're just trying to survive, right?
Yeah.
Um, so there's a little bit of that, and then, like you were saying, with technology, we have this ability to, like, follow and connect with
Yeah.
people online. And it is such a superficial thing. And we allow ourselves to, get into arguments and walk away and not
Yeah.
finish the story. Um, or to, like, call them and say, hey, what I really meant was, can we talk about this? Because I didn't mean to hurt your feelings or rile you
Yeah.
up. This is something I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
Um, how can I learn what you're trying to say as
Yeah.
well? But one of the things that I try to do is, when I'm at a restaurant and I'm waiting for somebody, I try not to, I'll check my phone for a few things, but I try not to look, like, be on Facebook. I
Yeah.
look around, I watch people, I see who's, trying to do the same, and maybe make eye contact. I'm not necessarily trying to fall in love every time, but I do understand that you completely cut off that ability to connect with new people when your nose is in the phone. And it's the same thing with our kids,
Yeah.
when we're constantly like looking at taking pictures and posting it on Instagram or Facebook, then we actually miss the memory and we actually
Yeah.
miss the moment. We forget to see the butterfly that flutters slowly by in their meandering path, even though they do have a mission.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so all of those things are so important. And I um I've been in a huge transition space in the last couple of years. And of course, we don't realize that we're always in transition, but sometimes it's kind of thrust upon us. And so, between the death of my mother, well, my grandmother first, then my mom, then my dad, uncle,
Mm.
a brother-in-law, COVID, divorce, all these things, all of that has been in the last 6 years. Um, my I've been thrown and thrust into what could have been just survival mode and how to go take the next step. And sometimes it was that. Sometimes my mind just like swirled and swirled and I didn't know where to go. But I also, I'm not sure if I made myself or I was made to just sit
Hmm.
and be still and be mindful and be present. And in that, I've rediscovered my spirituality, and in that, my understanding of seeing and being in the world, and the understanding that um, we have a lot more control over what happens in our lives than we think we do, simply by our thoughts. And we have the ability to completely change everything if we just had the um, strength to take one step at a time in the right direction.
Yeah.
And then realize that if it's not the right direction, you can still turn the other way.
Yeah.
And that's okay too, that there are lessons on all on those paths. Um, but that when you allow yourself to sit and see, recognize the beauty that constantly surrounds you,
Yeah.
whether it be in people or in nature. Gosh, there's so much. Like every day, I'm like, look at that sunset, look at those
Yeah.
clouds. Oh my, look at that flower, that butterfly. And the more I see it, the happier I am. Yesterday, I was so, like you were saying, I'm moving and I have all these things going on and kids. And it was the last day of school and I had like 4 kids in my car, 2 of which weren't mine. And I have all these things in my head and I was frustrated. And then I was driving and I looked over and I happened to see the view in the hill country from a different perspective of, seeing the hills in the distance. And I just relaxed my shoulders and took a deep breath. And then I looked at those 4 kids in the rearview mirror in the back seats and thought, how blessed am I to have these 4 kids in my car?
Yeah. Yeah.
Being wild and crazy and smelly and all the things.
Being kids. Yeah.
But yeah, like my perspective completely changed because I allowed it to.
Yeah.
And so I talk about, this connection that can happen with other people if you allow it, but it has to start from within
Yes.
and it
Absolutely.
has to be at home.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that and we are not cultured to really start there, right? We're not cultured to really spend any time thinking about how we are thinking about the world and how we're, our place in it, what we're doing to affect it, how we're being perceived, how we're coming across, how we're interacting and connecting with, our family, our friends, our community. And there's always this process of, you've got to, you should be, focused on driving your business harder and getting from point A to point B. There's this hustle culture that really seems to be taking over, and we're losing a lot because of that, right? And I love the fact and how you set that up. You're a beautiful storyteller, first of all, but the way that you sort of explain, like, look, there are some things that could have just like completely taken me off path, right? And you were able to find that strength and that heart to be able to say, nope, I'm not doing that, and I'm going to learn to appreciate, even though some things may be challenging, some circumstances may be difficult and hard. I'm not running from that, right? I'm going to face it, and I'm going to learn to find and appreciate the things in the moment. And I mean, I think the way that you shared that is going to inspire a lot of people, and I think it's a beautiful way to. It's a testament to who you are as a person, but I think it's also great to know that you found that strength all on your own, which is pretty amazing. A lot of people need that help in order to get there first because they don't even think it's possible. So hopefully, that'll inspire somebody to think differently.
I think we all have to find it on our own and at our own time. But I'm blessed that I have cultivated a network of people that care about me, so that I can have faith that I have a net.
Yeah.
Like I said, I grew up really poor, homeless lots of times, and I've never really had a feeling of a safety net.
Yeah.
So I've never felt like I could ask, like college. I put myself through college, and didn't even get $20 for a meal or anything like that. It was 100% me. So I remember walking by McDonald's, smelling McDonald's,
Yeah.
and thinking, I wish I could afford a Happy Meal.
Yeah.
I wish I could afford a Happy Meal, but I paid for the meal plan at school, and that's all I can eat.
Right.
Because I don't have any money.
Yeah.
There are a lot of lessons in that, but I've never felt like I could ask. And now that I have manifested the life that I want to live, obviously there's struggles and challenge and everything, but I have created this life, and I continue to build the life based on what I allow myself to think and believe. I have just started to realize that help is always a phone call away.
Yeah.
And that there's someone who's willing to listen. So I invest in a business coach, and it's a business and life coach. His name is Bill Small. And that was one of the first things that I did when I started my business. I didn't have a business partner. And he does a really, really good job. And I aspire and hope and try to be half as good as he is at helping me to understand that my personal health is my business health,
Mm-hmm.
and my family's health, and that there is a whole human being that
Yeah.
has to be taken care of in order for all the other things to be taken care of. But also, I think I stopped fighting the universe this last 6 months. And in that, I've listened to what all of the different voices are telling me. And I am not saying that in a schizophrenic way. But we really in our business forward culture, we are taught to only listen to our minds.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, is the wrong approach.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Our mind is meant to protect us, not to help us soar.
It's a great point. Yeah.
So when we listen to the voice that's saying, like, you really want to do this other thing, try it out. And then your mind says, oh my gosh, that's stupid. You're going to fail. You're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not pretty enough. You don't have the money. I have some really huge dreams. And when I was a kid, I thought that having a house with flowers on the wall. No, I always get that wrong. Flowers in the yard, pictures on the wall and matching dishes, which actually most of my art is flowers, so it
Yeah.
still works.
There you go.
But, flowers in the yard, pictures on the wall, and matching dishes. Like, because I move so much, that's
Yeah.
all I wanted. And I would dream about, having this life that I wanted to live, and I honestly thought that it was out of reach.
Yeah.
And that's why I bought my first house when I was 24, 25, somewhere in there, and stayed there for 10 years, like I said. And once I did that, I was like, what am I supposed to do now? Because I thought that was like, when I'm 75, I'm going to maybe get there.
Mm-hmm.
But I somehow, I kept dreaming, and I knew that I could. And when you continue to do that, it comes true. Not on your
Yeah.
timeline. You have
Yeah.
to be able to look back and say, wow, thank you, universe. Yes, I worked hard. I worked really hard. But thank you for, making this all a reality. But you
Yeah.
have to be careful, because you do get everything you ask for.
Yeah.
So if you think about, all the things you're lacking, you're going to continue to lack. And if
Yeah.
you think about whatever, I don't know what you think about, whatever it is, it's probably going to happen.
Yeah.
So, you do have to cultivate your thoughts and slow yourself down. But I encourage everybody, I don't do this often enough, but I encourage everybody to write down what you think you want your life to be, or what you think you want your business to be, and then put on your calendar to go back and read it and realize that it became that.
Yeah.
You didn't even have to put down steps and say, this is my action plan.
Yeah.
If you know it, and you clearly define it, when you look back, you'll realize that it happened.
Yep. No, I think that's excellent advice. And I think you just hit on a point that I make with my coaching clients, is that you have to actually don't put it on the list unless you can define it, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to have that emotional connection. Otherwise, it probably won't come true, right? You won't be all the way in or all the way committed. You ask people like, well, how much money is enough money, right? Oh yeah, if I had $1 million in the bank, well, how'd you arrive at $1 million? Tell me what the motivation and the logic. Well, I don't know. It just sounds like a lot. Well, we got to get specific, because if you really want what, you want financial security, and that may be, an extra $10,000 a year in and over above your salary, right? Or it could be, hey, I need, an extra $10,000 in my bank account at the end of every month. So what do we do is really very determined on our actions that we take to get there, right? So you just have this big nebulous, kind of big, hairy, audacious goal. It's great to have that, but really at the end of the day, a dream is just a dream. It becomes reality when you put the action behind it.
Yeah. And then the additional thing is, we look at, especially business goals. We do this more with business goals than anything else. With life, we say like, I, want to eventually have a bigger home, or whatever it might be that you have. And you like dream about, I do, I don't know. I can't be in everybody's mind. So I imagine that they're similar to mine. But we dream about what that house would look like, how we would decorate it, what the yard would be like. And we just kind of think about it. It's kind of in there, and becomes more and more clear the more we think about it. And we don't necessarily write down and tell our whole family, hey kids, this is my dream, this is my goal, but it's in there.
Yep.
And with our business, we write it down, we tell the board, we tell our management teams, this is the goal, this is what we're trying to do. And most of the time it's numbers driven.
Right.
But what we sometimes fail to do is, what is that going to look like? What is that going to feel like? What is that going to do for our business? What is it going to do for our customers? How is that going to change things? Because if you have a financial goal and you chase that financial goal, then will that just make you busier?
Yeah.
Or will it make you more profitable? If you're more profitable, what are you going to do with that profit? Are you going to give it back? Are you going to donate it? Are you going to take it all and get a yacht?
Yeah.
Hopefully you're that profitable that you can take it all and get a yacht as well.
Yeah.
Not take it all, but some of it. But what does it feel like?
Yeah.
And what is it going to do for you? What are you going to do with it?
Yep. What's the outcome? What's the outcome you're hoping to achieve? Yep.
And
Yeah.
then if you think about those things and you work toward that like feeling, it's easier to actually move in that direction than to say, what's this, what's this rock that we're going to, what is that book? You know what I'm talking about. I know, no, maybe you don't. What is this goal? Somebody out there knows. Um, what is this goal? What is this, one number? And it's the same thing with sales teams.
Yeah, yeah,
If you purpose-driven leadership and
yeah.
purpose-driven sales, if you talk about, you have a quota of selling, $15,000 a month. Did you meet your numbers? How are you meeting your numbers? Da, 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 da. Then it's really, really hard. It's really hard to sell
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
But if you say, how many people are we going to make the difference in their lives, and how are we going to make the difference in their lives? And it doesn't matter what your product is. You're
Right.
making a difference in somebody's lives. You're
That's
making
right.
it easier. You're allowing them to make more money. You are empowering them to do something.
Yeah.
So how are you changing their lives? And if you think about that way, then your conversation with your team, with your customers, your prospects, it all changes,
It does.
because you're talking about human to human, belly to belly.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
we are all people, and I think about marketing and sales in that way. And I talk about it that way, and we try to bring it back to that. And it's really hard with something like social media, where you're like, we just have to have, we told them we'd have this number of posts per week, and everybody says you got to post every day. So then you just get into this concept of like, post every day.
Yeah.
But then you're not having conversations and meaningful connections, and you're
That's
not
right.
really doing for your prospects and customers what you set out to do.
Right.
So then it goes back to, why do you want that additional money?
Yeah.
What are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
Are you going to impact more lives? What is it that you're doing?
Yeah. No, that's it. I love that perspective. I mean, since you mentioned it and the clients that you work with, let's take a second and let the audience know what Vine Collective does. What's the first, tell me what the motivation was behind the name, and then tell me what you guys offer.
So I am in love and obsessed with nature, and realize fully that we are animals that we call humans. And I love plants and watching them grow. And I've been obsessed with flowers since like one of my first memories is walking through a field of yellow flowers, like the little ones we call weeds, and saying, like, being upset that I might step on one and kill it. And so Vine Collective is bringing together the concept of always growing, moving, striving, connecting, because vines tend to like hold on and connect to and grow with
I
their
love.
anything that's around them. And sometimes they can overtake them if they're not comfortable. They can kind of snuff out
Yep.
what's around them. So um, it's something that they have to be, you have to be mindful of, but they're always reaching for the sun. They're always moving. So that's Vine. And it's also the concept of, we see what's reaching for the sun, but you also have the roots going deep,
Yeah.
and gathering and giving back. We don't realize that the roots take nutrients from the soil, but they also give back
Yeah.
to the soil for the plants that are surrounding. And then collective, because we are a collective of dreamers and makers, that all
I
kind of
love it.
work together, helping each other and helping our clients to soar. And I like I said, when I left the previous agency that I was working for, I honestly, first thought, I don't have a skill. I'll just continue doing what I'm doing for different set of clients. And so what I mostly did on a day-to-day basis was account management and client engagement, and manage the team. I did all those things. And I'm like, I mean, I can do that just for different clients. And so I wanted to create meaningful brand experiences for meaning-filled organizations.
I love it.
Yes, and it's amazing. And I was afraid at first to put, kind of not religious, but spiritual sounding, very light and, nature connected
Yeah.
content on my website, and thought, oh my gosh, businesses are going to think that I'm too out there, too woo woo to make this happen. But I realized as a marketer that you attract what you want to attract, and it's okay to repel. It's actually good. You want to repel the folks that aren't a good fit, just as much as you want to attract the ones that are a good fit. So with that, I have realized that my goal worked, and
Yeah.
the clients that work with me are absolutely wonderful people who completely understand the balance of home and business life, and that life happens in spite of your business goals. um, so my client roster is full of amazing, wonderful, heart-filled folks of all different shapes and sizes as far as the type of business. And what we do at Vine Collective is, a lot of people think of marketing as a one-way conversation, or a one-way messaging from business to prospect. Unfortunately, most businesses do think of the prospect and not the customer
Yeah.
when they think of their marketing. It's all a sales tool. Kind of, if your goal is always number driven, then it's always a sales tool. But really, from the moment, so I have a degree in theater. Surprise, I'm dramatic. So I never actually took one class in marketing, but my first job was that one, director of sales and marketing at Shoreline Grill, and I kind of went from there.
Yeah.
But I immediately, started reading books and going to the chamber, and learning everything I could about marketing. But it was all intuitive, in that I realized that branding isn't different than theater. Like, you create a fully immersive experience. So that's the theater that I get really excited about, when it's like a fully immersive experience. That's what branding is. At the time I was working in a restaurant, and I realized that if our hostess isn't happy, if our front door is a little too heavy, if anything isn't 100% right, then it's going to change the brand experience.
Yeah.
So actually, I haven't told this story, but one of the first things I did was go in and scrub the bathrooms myself, the floors. I was like, there's grit in the corners. Like, your sloppy mop isn't getting it. This is a high-end restaurant, and it needs to look and feel all the things from top to bottom in every corner. And we had a semi-open kitchen. I'm like, hey guys, people see you. This is part of the brand experience. And it's not just what you say. It's like every speck of any sort of, dust or grease or anything. It all matters.
I love it.
So that's kind of what we do. We start with a brand story, and make sure that our why is true, and that we are living forward from it. So this is something actually that I just discovered, and I don't know why I didn't know it before, but my coach helped me discover that my personal and my business goal is all the same, as it should be, and it is to explore, experience, and connect.
I love it. I love
Seems
it.
so simple, right? But it took a long time to figure that out. But that's what we do. We explore internally and make sure that that our experience and our connection is all pulling back to that why, and that impact that we want to make, that feeling we want people to have, and it is with our internal team and every single touch point of the business.
Yeah.
Every person in the organization, every vendor, every conversation with our current customers and prospects, and that it's not a one-way street. It's not a one-way conversation. It's a dialogue. So I work with business owners and organizations to help them go through that process.
So how can people learn about what you're doing? What's the web address?
Vine-collective.com.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes so that everybody can check that out. And I saw on the website it's very easy to interact. You can also get to the MVP Business Podcast there. You've got all the episodes. You've got some great content on the website itself, and just information and resources that I think can benefit just about anybody. Steph, this has been, I mean, we could talk for hours. I would love to continue this conversation. We're definitely going to have to do a follow-up to this, but I have one last ripple question I would ask you is, what does the ripple effect actually mean for you? I think you're living it. I mean, anybody that's listened and seen this will be like, oh, you just oodle the ripple, but I'm curious what your definition of the ripple effect might be.
Because I moved so much when I was a kid, I remember for a long time, sometimes we would go back to the same town. Like we would leave and we'd come back a year or so later. And I realized that everybody else had remember when stories and I didn't.
Yeah.
And I thought then, like, oh, I really want remember when stories. They seem so great. Like I have them with my brother and sister, and that's really it. Because I didn't even know my family, like cousins and stuff that much. And so that, I think that's a big part of it. But for me, I've been using this quote that my client from the company Blue Fern said is, we all make an impact on the world simply by living in it.
I love it.
And it blew my mind because it was a business conversation. And I was like, what kind of impact do you want to have on this? And I thought, because their whole organization is giving back to the community constantly. But it was like, I just want to be, I want to be good, and I want to show up. And we don't realize what a smile can do. Like not everybody has to have deep conversations on a train in New York City. But allow yourself to make eye contact and smile, allow yourself to see the butterfly or see that distance view in the hill country or whatever it might be, and notice what that ripple, what it does to you.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I love that. Guys, you've got to check out vine-collective.com to get engaged and have conversations with Stephanie and learn about what she can bring to your business, because she is phenomenal. I am so honored that you agreed to be on the podcast. Like I said, we're definitely doing this again. I mean, you and I could totally nerd out on the connecting thing for hours and hours and hours. So it'll be fun to go back and explore this again. But I am so grateful that you made the time, especially on a day that you have so much going on, to record the podcast. I'm just so grateful. But most importantly, I'm grateful for your friendship and just for you being in my life, because you are amazing.
Thank you, Steve. I'm so happy to have you in my life as well.
All right. Well, listen, everybody, we'll be back again with another episode of the Ripple Effect Podcast very soon. But until then, ripple on.